IB Nation, welcome back to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Saturday, December 16th. Was talking to my guy, Sean Davis, earlier. He's with me now. I'm like, we got to go live today. There's just too much going on. We got to go live today. You and Ryan did a great job yesterday on the recruiting podcast. And today, Sean, we're going to talk about the Notre Dame team because there's a lot to discuss. A lot has happened. Thursday night, Audric Estime announced his intentions, which were expected, to go to the NFL and not play in the bowl game. We're going to talk about that, the legacy that Audric leaves behind, a little bit about the Notre Dame history at running back and how that plays into our confidence level that Notre Dame is going to be just fine at running back. But that doesn't at all mean that you don't appreciate what Audric did. We'll dive into the specific reasons why about this specific team, not just the history of why we think Notre Dame's going to be pretty good at running back. And then we'll dive into the big news today from the press conference from Marcus Freeman, which is Charles Jagusah is going to be the starting left tackle in the bowl game, which was a surprise, to be honest with you, in a lot of different ways. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what that means for the present future of Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And then we'll talk a little bit about some comments he made about the linebacker position. We won't spend quite as much time on that. No mailbag today, no official mailbag today. If we do have a super chat in there, if anybody wants a question that they need to get asked today, and you can't wait till Monday's mailbag to do it, go ahead and throw a super chat in there. We'll get to it. But otherwise, we are going to be on topic today. Sean, my friend, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining me on this cold Midwestern Saturday afternoon, but a great day otherwise.
Man, it's fantastic, right? So much to look forward to, so much good news to talk about. Let's get to it, man.
So topic number one today, Sean, is we're going to talk about Notre Dame running back position. And obviously Thursday night, was sitting at dinner and got the text, or it was actually right before we were going to go to dinner, Thursday's date night for Angela and I, right before we were going to leave around 5:50, I think. The news broke that Audric had declared for the NFL draft, would be opting out of the bowl game. Good news is we already knew it was going to happen, and we knew it was going to happen sometime on Thursday. So we had a story written, just had to, publish it and get it sent out. And then we went to dinner and just kind of got a chance to reflect on the career he has had, but it also immediately how it goes, Sean, is you got to start thinking about what's coming up next, right? So before we just drive past Audric and talk about what's next, I want to talk about Audric because this is a young man who I think did things at Notre Dame that deserve to be talked about for a little bit, and we've talked a lot about Audric over the last couple of years, but just a great story, just some background, Sean. You remember this. Will Shipley, it's the guy that Notre Dame wanted, and they did do a good job closing on him. He decided to stay closer to home. It was a bad recruiting miss, but those are going to happen in football. And the key is, what do you do about it when you have those misses? Well, I'll tell you what, Tommy Rees and Lance Taylor rallied, right, and said, okay, we didn't get Will Shipley. Let's go out and get something else. They first went out and got Logan Diggs, got him that summer. Later in the year, they went out and got Audric Estime, flipped him from Michigan State. Audric was a pretty good player as a junior, came out in 8 games as a senior and rushed for, I think, like about almost 2,000 yards in like 8 games because of COVID shortened season. And it was ended up being a really dynamic 1-2 punch. Will Shipley's been a good running back at Clemson, but he's not Audric Estime. And that 1-2 punch that Notre Dame had last year was really impressive. Audric comes in his freshman year, Sean, and doesn't play a whole lot. Carries the ball, I think, 7 times for like 67 yards, something like that, 9 times for 67 yards. Got all but one of his carries against Georgia Tech. And, it was 7 yards for 60 carries, Got all but one of his carries against Georgia Tech. He carried the ball 1 time in the bowl game for -1 yards. All his other six carries for 61 yards came again against Georgia Tech. 55-0 win. And then he come out his sophomore year. Doesn't start off great, Sean, as it didn't start off great for the entire offense at Notre Dame in 2022. Only rushes for 21 yards against Ohio State, although he does score from 1 yard out. Goes for 33 yards on 10 carries for Marshall. And then you started to see a little something in the Cal game, Sean. He caught 3 passes for 43 yards, had 18 carries, 76 yards rushing. First 100-yard game of his career, total yards. And really from there, Sean, it was just kind of you knew what you were getting. And, first year had some fumble problems, gets benched after fumbling the ball against UNLV. And really from that moment on, we saw a different Audric Estime, really the rest of his career. I think he only put the ball on the ground once after that. That was against Navy this year. Comes out the next week after fumbling, and you talk about responding to adversity, Sean. Comes out
Mm-hmm.
the next week against Syracuse on the road, top 25 team. Notre Dame's coming off, the UNLV win, still reeling a little bit from the Stanford game. First 2 carries of the game are Audric right downhill, and he looks good. Goes for 123 yards on 20 carries. Goes for 104 the next week against Clemson. Finishes the year off on a strong note, and the bowl game has 100 yards of offense again. They were a dynamic 1-2 punch. Him and Logan Diggs. Audric goes for 927 touchdowns. Logan goes for 822. And Logan decides to transfer. And Audric is now the guy. And he came out his senior year, Sean, and quickly established himself like, yep, we're going to be all right.
Yeah.
And goes for 95 yards against Navy on only 16 carries, goes for $116 against Tennessee State, goes for 134 against NC State, 176 against Central Michigan, but didn't do it on a lot of carries, Sean. He averaged 8.9, 9.6, and 8.8 yards per carry in those 3 games. And just the rest of the year, he was the offense. I mean, he really was the offense. And, of course, it was very fitting the way he ended his career. 300-yard games in his last 4. Would have had over 100 against Clemson if Notre Dame hadn't fallen behind 24-6.
Mm-hmm.
82 yards in the first half. He was the Notre Dame offense against Clemson, if we're being completely honest about that. Him and Xavier Watts were the Notre Dame offense in that game against Clemson. And then his last home game goes for 115 yards against Wake Forest, and then has, without a doubt, the best performance of his career. He was absolutely brilliant against Stanford. The offensive line was very, very good, but he was also, his vision in that game, his footwork, his ability to find the holes, goes for a career-high 238 yards and a career-high 24 carries and a career-high 4 touchdowns. Ends his senior season with 1,341 yards, which is the 5th best single-season mark in Notre Dame history. And he has 18 rushing touchdowns, which is a Notre Dame record. And it was a very fitting end, Sean, that on the last carry of Audric Estime's career, he bounces it outside, reads it perfectly, line blocks it well. He reads it, gets through the hole, bounces it out to the left side, runs in for a 25-yard touchdown. A very fitting end to a kid who was a heck of a running back and a great representative of everything that makes Notre Dame unique, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember the first time I laid eyes on him in a practice, my initial reaction is, wow, this kid has great feet for that size. And I think we've watched him learn how to become a running back, because that is nuanced when it comes to knowing what great vision, trusting your feet, and then knowing how to make the cut at the right time. And he goes backside on that run, is blocked well. He probably could have gone to another hole and maybe got 7, 8, 9 yards. But just his advancement as a running back allowed him to turn that into a touchdown. And it's just, a tip of the cap to the young man and the hard work that he's put in with Dylan McCullough leading the way for him in that room. And then I just want to talk about the young man that he is. Always upbeat, always positive. Even, the lashing that he took from Coach Freeman in that Stanford game at a certain moment, he immediately shook his head, turned around, put his helmet back on, and went back to work. And like you said, put forth the best performance of his career and ended things the way it should have ended for him at Notre Dame. So huge congratulations. I know we did a poll, and as much as people love him, the question we asked was, where does he land on the all-time rushers at Notre Dame? And most people settled on top 10.
Sure.
Top 10.
Sure.
And then I think second place was top 5.
Yeah.
And the top 5 is pretty, when I look, the top 5 is pretty solidified.
I mean, it's
you're really
going to
have
like
to, you're going to
Jerome Bettis, Reggie Brooks, Alan Pinkett, Vegas Ferguson. You could talk about Autry Denson being in that conversation.
Denson.
I mean, those are 5 guys that are certainly going to be.
Heck, you can even throw from a number standpoint Josh Adams is like
Adams.
number 3 all time.
Yeah. And Josh would have broke the all-time record if he'd come back for a senior year.
He'd come back for a senior year.
Yeah.
So
rushed for a freshman record, 838 as a true freshman, went for 960-something the next year, and then went for over 1,400, had the number 2 all-time single season the next year and had 9 touchdowns. And that just kind of puts it into Josh Adams had that great year, Sean, and he was a heck of a back. He had 9 rushing touchdowns that season. Audric had
Mhm.
18 this year, right? I mean, part of that was Brandon Wimbush, but like that's an impressive number.
Mhm.
And he scored multiple touchdowns, at least 2 touchdowns 5 times this year. He had 2 against NC State. He had 2 against Duke, 2 against USC, 3 against Pitt, and then 4 against Stanford. And he scored in each of the last 5 games of the season. He reached the end zone. So a really special season. But yeah, top 10. And now if Audric would have come back for senior year, maybe we'd be having a different. I mean, I'm pretty sure we'd be having a different conversation.
Mhm.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. So love what he did, Sean. And I'm very the debate that I've heard people have is who was better, Audric or Kyron. You know, they were both really good players. They're different situations. I've always said I would have loved to see what Audric Estimate could have done behind the 2020 offensive line. With all due respect to Kyron, I would have loved to see what Audric could have done behind that offensive line. You know, but they were both great players. They were different players. They had different personalities, and I don't really care to get into who was better. It's going to be more of a personal preference. My personal preference is Audric. Other people are going to make a case for Kyron. The reality is they were both excellent football players. And that kind of leads me into the next conversation, right, Sean, is Notre Dame has really started to develop a nice little running back situation that doesn't get talked a lot about nationally.
Mhm.
And Notre Dame, from when Brian Kelly was hired, 2010 to 2014, a stretch of 5 years, they had 1,000-yard season from a running back. And that was Sear Wood in 2011. Now, I've contended that they would have had a shot to have 2,000-yard running backs that season if Jonas Gray doesn't get hurt against Boston College. You know, who knows? But you had a 1,000-yard running back. 2012, Theo Riddick is lead your team with over 900 yards, but he doesn't get to 1,000 in sort of a split share with Sear Wood. You go down to 2013, Torian Folston leads the team in rushing, but doesn't get to 1,000 yards that season. Torian had 704. Actually, Cam McDaniel actually led the team in rushing in 2013, a guy that you guys have had on your show a bunch with 704 yards. Then Torian leads the team in 14 with 889. 15, it kind of begins. Torian's expected to have a big year, and I still wish we could have seen Torian healthy behind that 2015 offensive line. But he goes down on the second carry of the game, and up comes CJ Procise, a converted wide receiver who had kind of opened people's eyes when he took a jet sweep for 50 yards in the Music City Bowl against LSU the year before. A kid who had been a safety or a wide receiver his whole career, high school, college, never played running back. Notre Dame puts him a running back, and he rushes for 1,029 yards and 11 touchdowns. And in that time, Sean, Notre Dame has really become just a program that just generates really good rushers every year. You had CJ in that year. Now, that's the same year that, Josh Adams also set the school record for a true freshman in rushing yards at 838. And then in 2016, Josh goes for 933. That next season, 2017, Josh breaks out, rushes for 1,430 yards, 9 touchdowns, has a modern record. I believe it was second all time, or the modern record second. I believe Reggie Brooks, is the only one that was above, because Reggie was like 8 yards a carry in 1992, which is still just nuts to comprehend, averaging 8 yards a carry against that schedule. But so Josh has a great year, 1,430 yards. Come out in 2018. Dexter Williams is suspended for the first 4 games. We see kind of a Tony Jones, Jafar Armstrong thing, and then Dexter comes back in game 5. On the first carry of the season, he houses it from like 50 yards away, and it was on. In only 9 games, Dexter Williams rushed for 995 yards and 12 touchdowns that season. Come out in 2019, Tony Jones has a really quietly good year, averages 6 yards a carry, 857 yards. He ended his career on a very strong note as well. If you remember, Sean, rushing for 135 yards on 11 touchdowns against Iowa State. And I still contend, if he does not get hurt against Michigan, Tony Jones would have gone over 1,000 yards that year. Because if you remember, he had 4 100-yard games in the first 6 games of the year. And he absolutely tore up USC that season. 176 yards on 25 carries. Finishes the year, and he was just never healthy the rest of the way. Finishes the year on a very strong note. Come out the next 2 years, Kyron Williams becomes the first running back at Notre Dame since Darius Walker back in 05 and 06 to go back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. He goes for 1,125 and 13 touchdowns in only 12 games in 2020. Goes for 1,005 yards and 14 touchdowns in 2021 in only 12 games because he sat out the bowl game.
Yeah.
2022, we have a breakout season from Logan and Audric. There was not one guy. They were both creeped up on 1,000 yards that year.
Yeah.
Logan went for 822. Audric went for 920. They combined for 15 touchdowns. And, of course, this year, Audric Estime breaks out with 1,341 yards, 18 touchdowns, which ranked third in the country. You start to look at it and you say, man, Notre Dame is just churning out some really productive running backs in the last 8 years. And it starts giving you faith. And the thing is, only one dude was back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher. And only twice during that stretch did you have the same guy leading your team in rushing yards 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Or 3 times. So actually it was Audric 2 years, Kyron 2 years, Adams 2 years, but then there was other guys mixed in there. And so you start to say, boy, they are starting to the NFL draft hasn't shown it yet, but just for college backs, man, Notre Dame is starting to have some really impressive production at the running back position.
You know what? It's so relational, right? Development at the running back position and how connected it is to the ability, and this will probably go to one of the topics we're going to talk about a little bit later, the confidence that we have as a fan base that, oh, we got a new running back, they're going to be fine. Oh, we got a young offensive lineman, he'll be fine. Because the history of development and coaching, sorry about that, guys, the history of development and coaching at the University of Notre Dame, gives the fan base that confidence, even when there are questions, because you have first-time starters coming through or stepping into that role. And now, we have talent, but next year without Audric, it's going to be like, okay, question mark, who's going to be the next guy? But there's faith there, right? Because we know there's talent, and no matter who the coaches are, because coaches have changed, offensive line coach, running back coach, you've seen success at Notre Dame, with that. And I would love nothing more than to be able to watch Seven come back and, man, walk into College Station and put up 150 with 2 touchdowns. But he set the stage. And that's what you really want your veterans to do, right? You want them to learn. And when they get their opportunity, you want them to seize it and make the most of it, but then blaze a trail for the guys behind them to follow. And at the running back and offensive line positions, Notre Dame has done an incredible job, and their players have done an incredible job of doing that and forming a legacy that's still blazing to this day. And I think we're going to see, those reins picked up by the young players in both positions, specifically the running back position next year. It's really something to be excited about.
Yes. I remember watching that Stanford game, which Audric was phenomenal. I mean, one of the best games we've seen from a Notre Dame running back in a while, in my opinion. And I'll just remember at the end of the game, near the end of the game, when Coach Freeman's getting on Audric about Jabron Payne putting the ball on the ground. And you're just like, that's the respect that they have in that room. Dude, you're the leader. Why are you on the sidelines letting that happen? Right? And just the symbol of, hey, like, dude, this is your room. That was earned. That was earned by Audric. You know what I mean? Like, you're that leader in that room. And so you're going to look at, what you see from a guy like him, because let's be honest, some of the backs that we saw were really good backs, but they weren't exactly guys that you would say, hey, model him for how he conducts his business. And let's just be real about that. You know what I mean? Not all those guys were being like him kind of guys, but Audric got to play behind Kyron Williams for a year and see he was one of those guys that you're like, see the passion he plays the game, do that. And then you see Audric kind of become that guy. And now he models it for like, hey, here's the expectation in Notre Dame. And when you look at Audric, the thing I love about him, Sean, is he had some of his best games and some of their biggest moments. He was not a guy that just racked up a bunch of yards against a bad Stanford team. This is a kid that went out and went for almost 100 against USC. Would have had over, but he had a couple carries that were like from 1 yard out because that's where the drive started. Goes for 134 against NC State, but that 80-yard touchdown run completely changed the complexion of that game against them. Ran the ball very well against Ohio State. Should have gotten more carries. I mean, it was our biggest beef in that game. Dude, you should have fed Audric at the game because he had Ohio State on skates at the end of that game. Runs very well against Clemson this year. Went for over 100 against Clemson last year. Goes for over 120 on the road against a ranked one-loss Syracuse team last year. They go on the road. They're playing North Carolina, undefeated North Carolina. Notre Dame is scrambling. They're 1-2. They barely beat Cal the week before, and Audric goes off, 7.9 per carry, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns in that game. And he just became that guy that was like, hey, look, when you need a play, that's the guy you go to. He had I still remember that carry he had against South Carolina, where it was on, I think it was on it might have been on their game-winning drive, but they handed the ball off to the left. He gets hit 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage by 3 guys, and he just carries them for a 3-yard gain.
Yeah.
And that changed that drive. Instead of 2nd and 13, and now you're like, shoot, now we got to throw the football.
Right.
He keeps it going to where you're in down and distance again.
Yeah.
And it just, he was always that guy, Sean. So it's like you and I both know we've seen guys in our career that are sort of hollow yards guys, right? Guys that put up numbers, but they put up numbers in bulk against really bad teams. The guys that I love are the guys that you look at and say, boy, you knew in a big game that guy was going to step up and be that dude. And actually, it was the final drive of the game. It was actually, now that I'm thinking about it, Sean, I'm going to go look this up. I believe it was the play right before the Mitchell Evans touchdown.
Yeah.
So
which made that play call available to Tom. Yeah.
Right. So it's 3rd and 7. You're still in, tie ball game. We're in field goal territory. You're going to still play the run, and that opens it up. So he was a big game back. And to me, that's something I'll always appreciate about Audric, because there's some backs that put up yards and they're easily forgotten because they didn't do it when it mattered most. Audric was a when it matters most kind of guy.
Yeah,
that's what he developed into at Notre Dame. And
you just touched on something that I don't know. Maybe that North Carolina game, that run from North Carolina to Stanford in 23, where you say because of the fumbles, maybe you could say, okay, he wasn't locked in. I can't think of a game where Audric wasn't ready.
Yeah,
well, he was ready to dominate Clemson.
Right.
Like he was ready.
Well, real quick, his fumble against North Carolina was him trying to stretch the ball into the end zone.
Into the end zone, right?
The Stanford fumble, I mean, you gotta protect the ball, but it was a guy came from behind. It wasn't. I mean, the only silly fumble he had was against Navy this year. Honestly, I mean, just put the ball in the outside arm, man. You know that. But yeah, to your point, they weren't like, oh, he's not locked in moments. It was like, dude, I know you're locked in, but I can't put you out there when you're putting the ball on the ground. But then, so he goes for 3 carries for 17 yards. I mean, if he doesn't get benched against UNLV because of that, he's over 1,000 yards last year too. Finished with 920. Only had 17 yards on 3 carries in that game. And had a touchdown. 3 carries, 17 yards in a touchdown, and they pulled him because of the fumble. But what did he do next week, Sean? What did he do next week?
You already know,
right? And that included that highlight plant moment of that poor kid from Syracuse. Just drove his face into the turf. Kid's head bounced off the turf. Audric stiff-armed him so bad.
It's like this young man has a mother, man, that is watching this game.
His mother's watching. Yeah, exactly. What's wrong with you, man? Like, his grandmother just watched you do that. What is wrong with you?
Man.
Took his soul. There's no doubt. Just a great kid, Sean, a great back, and just exactly what you expect a Notre Dame player to be. When you think of that stereotypical Notre Dame kid, a quiet confidence, but not afraid to say it, but not arrogant, but confident. Everything we hear, does everything you need, ask him to do in the community. Goes to class, does all the things you need to do, works his tail off, and then goes out there and balls out. I mean, and with us always on a smile on his face, right?
He had a superhero quality to him, like the muscles, and it was just like, you see him in the cutoff shirt, and it's like, it just made you feel good that, man, this is the guy we're rolling with come Saturday
Yeah.
afternoon. I'm glad he's on our team, and
Yeah.
like I said, I wish I could watch him don the gold helmet just one more
Sure.
time, even if it was in the Sun Bowl. But
Yeah.
he
Would be
deserves
nice.
he deserves to start to focus on the next level.
Absolutely.
He
And
deserves
again, I don't like it, but it's the era we're in.
that.
It's the era we're in. And my fault is more towards the system that we've created
Hmm.
as a college football institution, as opposed to more so I'm ticked at Joe Alt and I'm ticked at Audric and I'm ticked at, it is
Hmm.
what it is. But you also look at it and say, Sean, based on history, Notre Dame's going to be just fine.
Hmm.
They're going to be just fine at
Hmm.
running back. Let's take it into the next topic, Sean, and it's exactly that topic right there. The future of Notre Dame's backfield is now the present of Notre Dame's backfield now that
Yeah.
Audric Estime has declared for the NFL draft and is going to opt out. And that is, you had a 5-man running back rotation before. Now you have a 4-man running back rotation. Jeremiah Love, I anticipate, talking to sources, that I anticipate him kind of being RB1 in the bowl game. We're also going to see a lot of Jadarian Price. I would say it's kind of more RB1A and RB1B
1B. Yeah.
kind of situation. Talking to a source close to the situation, I was told that the pitch that Notre Dame had to Jeremiah and Jadarian this offseason was going to be about next year. It is going to be a 1A, 1B. That, we'll always ride the hot hand, but pitching it like, hey, we think we can get both of you guys to be big time producers. And so they're excited about that future, and that future is now. And then, of course, there's been other seasons where if Jabron Payne was Notre Dame starting running back, I'd be like, yeah, they're going to be all right. Jabron's a good
Hmm.
football player.
Yeah.
But speaking specifically about the bowl game, we'll still see plenty of Jabron as the third down back. I don't think that'll change. I think his role will stay the same, be that third down back. And then Devin Ford, his role is going to be, coach, whatever you need me to do, and Devin will do it. And I've loved
Yeah.
watching that kid be that kind of guy this year. You want me to return kicks? I'll return kicks. You want me to be the lead back on kick return? I'll be the lead back on kick return. You want me to be a lead blocker? I'll be a lead blocker. You want me to catch the ball? I'll catch the ball. You want me to run the ball? I'll run the ball. And, probably only going to be here for a year, but you really enjoyed just that team first mentality of a kid who just showed up.
Yeah.
Right in the fall. And so he'll be there too. But it really is about, first and foremost, those first two guys, Sean.
Hmm.
And this is it's sort of like what bowls have become is a glimpse into the future of what we're going to see. And to a degree, Sean, I'm kind of excited about that, to be honest with you. I'm excited. Love what Audric did. If he wanted to come back, I'd have said, cool. But he made his decision, and now you look forward and you're like, boy, I really like what's coming down the pike, because when you just look at we'll talk bowl game first, and then we'll kind of talk 24.
Yeah.
But just looking at the bowl game, it's going to be a great chance for us to see what Jeremiah and Jadarian have to offer, because they're not going to be running in ideal conditions. They're going to be going up against one of the better run defenses in college football, with no Joe Alt, with no Blake Fisher,
Yeah.
with no Mitchell Evans, no Zeke Correll, although they've been there before since
Hmm.
Zeke didn't play the last two games. So we're going to say, hey, it's time for you to go be a ball player. And like Audric, I thought the O-line played really well in the first half against Clemson. Then you break down the film and you're like, yeah, they didn't play that well. That was more about Audric just being a stud.
Cutting back, hurdling people.
Oh, yeah. So this is going to be our first glimpse into what I think I'll just hold off yeah. No, I'm saying now, forget it. It's a Saturday. I'm having fun. I'm in a great mood. This has a chance to be a really special 1-2 punch. And I loved Diggs and Estime. Loved them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is this combo, if they can stay healthy, keep working and grinding, this combination of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price has a chance to be special, because the one thing that they can both do, their games are different, but the one thing they have in common, you are now going to have a 1A, 1B of flat out home run hitters that can score from anywhere on the field.
Anywhere. Yeah. And you combine that with the legs of Riley Leonard in that offense, if they decide to go to some RPOs and some other things.
We'll get to 2024, I promise. But even just for the bowl game, this 1-2 punch, if they can play well, is going to hopefully take some of the pressure off of Steve Angeli.
I mean,
that's the thing, is you can shut them down 60, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of backs they are. Shut them down 40.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just the kind of runners they are.
But I think it would benefit in the bowl game. I think they can get to some waggle stuff
Right.
with Steve, because Steve is
Ex
athletic enough. He's
right.
athletic enough. He's, and probably can run it a little bit more effectively than Sam Hartman, because he's been able to get out there and be a little bit more athletic. So I think I'm excited, and we all are excited to see
Yeah.
what Jared Parker can come up with
Right.
specifically for that run game with these two guys, right?
And pass game. And
Yes.
to your point, Sean, and pass game, because look, it's not better, not worse. It's just different. They're very different backs from Audric.
Hmm.
You're just not going to run, 12, 13 personnel duo inside zone all day with them. Those are going to be parts of what you do. They can both be that kind of back. They can bounce it for big plays, cut it back for big plays, but you're just not going to run them the same way you ran Audric. There's things they have to learn. There's somebody asked me we're doing a weekend mailbag at Irish Break. That's from the message boards. We have that going. It's about 5 pages long. I'm about maybe halfway through answering all the questions, with all the news breaking. But one of the questions was, what does Jeremiah have to work on? Get bigger, stronger, and all that. But the one thing is, he's got to learn to be patient. Audric was incredibly patient when he needed to be. Jeremiah's going to have to learn that. These reps in the bowl practice are going to help him a ton with that. With Jadarian is just still get back healthy. I mean, he's still not, year 2 removed from the Achilles is going to be a lot better than year 1. And he was pretty explosive this year. I mean, first career touch, he goes for a 19-yard touchdown, right? As a touchdown kick return against USC, but they're guys, Sean, to your point, that you can use them together in some, like, if you're a creative offensive coordinator, you got to be drooling over the possibilities of what you can do with these two kids, because there's a lot of carryover in their game. They can run inside zone, outside zone. But they're also very different in a lot of ways too. But they can both make plays in the backfield. You can use Jeremiah as your read zone guy with Jadarian doing something in the pass game or a read. I'm just talking about the bowl game. You can get even more creative when you add a mobile quarterback, which we'll get into. There's things you can do running one guy, like what I would love to see them do. What Notre Dame did a lot of this year is they put Jeremiah in the boundary and just run him on a wheel route. I would love to see them run him on a wheel route and then bring Jadarian on a slip screen to that same side.
Yeah.
And sell that with,
that.
Right. And if you're creative, there's a lot you can do with these kids, right? Run 4 verts and then the delay right up the middle with Jadarian, right? Or Jeremiah. So it's going to be fun to watch these two kids in the bowl game, Sean. And again, it's not about necessarily them having 100 yards each or anything like that. It's just about getting a chance to get them the work that they need to go out and play in this game. Cause it's not just the 10 to 15 carries they'll each get in the bowl game. It's also about the practice reps they're going to get as we kind of look forward to 2024. And that's when you start, as to your point, John, I'll let you pick up from where you were kind of hitting at earlier. But when you start thinking of these two dynamic backs in a backfield with a quarterback that you have to worry about with the football, you start getting visions of what we saw with Josh Adams and Brandon Wimbush in 2017. Now, Riley Leonard's not Brandon Wimbush. He's better, in my opinion, because he's so much of a better passer. But he's every bit the threat that Brandon was in 2017. And one mistake, keying the quarterback, means Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price taking that inside zone for 80, like we saw with Josh Adams in 2017.
Yeah, and I actually like the Oregon State head coach, because I think he was a very good defensive coordinator for them. So I'm very interested in seeing,
he's not going to be there.
I know.
So that's the weirdest thing I've ever
seen.
That's the weirdest
thing, right?
He was with them the whole season.
Right.
They're not going to have him coach in the bowl game. It's a pretty good linebacker at Oregon State too.
Yeah. I don't know. Are they veteran bookends, pass rushers playing?
As of now, yes. As of now, the only guys that they're losing are their leading tackler at linebacker, their safety Achille Arnold, and one of their corners. As of now, that's all I've seen declare for the NFL draft. So the rest of their D-line, as of now, from what we've seen and what's been reported, will be back. And as you're getting to, it's one of the top 10 pass rushing defenses in college football from a sack standpoint.
Yeah. So that should be challenging, and we'll get to that in a moment. But this is going to be a great opportunity, man. When we get to this Sun Bowl, to see a lot of different things and how Notre Dame wants to go ahead and attack this defense. And that's what I really want to get at. It's like, because preparing for Audric is one thing, but preparing for these running backs in a different style of running and different type of approach is going to be interesting to see not only how Oregon State projects, how they should stop. I'm sure they're going to have their safeties close to the line of scrimmage. The lack of depth of wide receiver, like first time
Sure.
starter. Absolutely. Let's sell out. Let's sell out. So early, watch the waggles,
Hmm.
watch the running backs, coming off a fake into the flats, play action, and some other things to take advantage of that aggressive bookends that they have. And then some screens like you talked about. Notre Dame going to that early as well. That's going to be huge. So
Hmm.
this the versatility. There's a more versatile running game probably coming. Not to say they couldn't do certain things with Audrey Estimate, because I think he improved his hands while he was at Notre Dame as well in the passing game, Audrey Estimate.
Hmm.
But I really do believe that we're about to see Jared Parker possibly open up some things that
You,
might not have been revealed throughout the regular season on a large scale. Maybe we saw it one or two times, but now
yeah.
they
Well,
might get to it a
there's
little bit
definitely going to
more.
be some run game stuff next year, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to look a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
Simply, and it will look different from the bowl game because Steve's a quality athlete, but you're not going to be using Steve Angeli the way you used Riley Leonard.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's going to be some things Texas A&M's just not going to know. They're just going to have to kind of, okay, this is what we think they're going to do. And obviously Mike Elko will have some familiarity with Riley Leonard, but there's going to be some wrinkles that you're like, you're not quite sure what we've got in game one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I say is if you're a creative offensive mind, there's a lot you can do with this backfield. And then you've got a hammer like Jabron Payne that can still do some things. And then if you look into 2024, you're welcoming Keidron Young and Aeneas Williams into the backfield, which is just kind of scary. I mean, I was talking with a parent of one of the current running backs who was like, I swear to you, this is a true story. You know who I'm talking about, Sean. I was talking with a parent of one of the current running backs, and he goes, these boys better be ready because that Keidron Young kid can ball. And this is a parent of a current running back like, my son better be ready because I watched this kid play. And he's no joke. So it's going to be a really talented group, Sean, very talented group. And you're just going to be able to do a lot of different, because you don't have to get rid of inside zone and duo at all, especially with Jadarian, but you'd be silly not to be running inside zone with Jeremiah, because he gets that cutback and it's
a wrap.
Strike up the band, baby. I mean, that's kind of what he's going to be. But there's just so many different things you can do: RPO game, screen game, quarterback read stuff in the run game, where it's like you're a play side inside linebacker and they're running power read, and you've got to worry about, okay, is Riley keeping this, or is he handing it off to Jeremiah? And then all of a sudden you're just a second too late. You're not getting to Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price. It's not happening. These are legit 4-4 athletes. And it starts getting a little exciting. It's going to look a lot different, in my opinion, as far as how they do it. Now, the run schemes won't be a whole lot different, but you can do different things formationally. I talked about this past week, Sean, and we'll do it again here. With Notre Dame, and when you've got Audric Estimate running back and you've got Sam Hartman a quarterback, the fact of the matter is you always have to do something to account for the backside as an offense. You've got to get a tight end there, a receiver there, something there to occupy that backside. When you've got a Riley Leonard a quarterback, Riley Leonard occupies that backside. You now got to worry about him keeping that football. So you can still crash your defensive end, but now your linebacker's got to get into space. Well, if you do that, here's what makes it dangerous. A lot of the things the teams will do to defend the quarterback keep makes them vulnerable when it's not really a quarterback keep, but they're reading it and they are bringing a tight end, because now it's easier for me to seal that or wrap it up, because you're just going to crash to take the back almost like your triple option. So instead of holding, Mitchell Evans and Eli Redden coming backside to take that end, the end's taking himself out by going to the running back. And now you've got a lead blocker getting up to that backside linebacker.
Linebacker.
Not running that with Sam Hartman. It's not a knock on Sam Hartman. That's just not his game. You'd be silly to be running that with Sam Hartman. So you start thinking of all the different things you can do, all the different wrinkles. It's still going to be inside zone. It's going to be duo. It's going to be counter. It's going to be power. It's going to be buck sweep. It's going to be those same things. But how you get to it with the RPOs and the quarterback keeps makes it so much more dangerous. And so now all of a sudden it's sort of like a we help you, you help us scenario with the running backs and the quarterback. Is, hey, your running ability takes some pressure off us and makes people can't just key on us. Because like when Audric was in the game in 12 and 13 personnel, all 11 dudes on defense were like, eyes on 7.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, you almost dared them to run a bootleg or something different in that situation. Now it's like, okay, I got to have my eyes on 12 or 24, but oh shoot, I got to worry about 13 as well and what he might do with the football. So it just makes Notre Dame a completely different team on how you defend them. Now, it doesn't mean that they're definitely going to be better or worse. It just means how teams prepared to defend Notre Dame in 2023 is going to be a lot different from how you defend them in 2024 because you're going to have way more explosiveness at running back, and you're going to have a quarterback that plays the game completely differently to the way Sam Hartman played the game, even the way that Ian Book played the game, certainly the way that Jack Cohn played the game, the way that Drew Pine played the game. You're going to have a type of quarterback that Notre Dame hasn't really had in a while. And then you're going to have two backs that are just it's a lot like the 2015 offense, to be honest with you. You know, whether it's Malik or Deshaun, because you had two home run hitters at running back in Josh Adams and CJ Procise. You had some pretty dynamic athletes on the perimeter. And then you had this quarterback that could, if you paid too much attention to everybody else, could run for 70-something yards on a quarterback. I'm thinking of the Deshaun Kaiser run against Temple. Had a really good defense that last year. Had like 5 players from that defense get drafted. And you pull the ball, and he's just off out the gate for a 70-yard something touchdown run. You remember that play? And you're running power read, and it's just like, dude, who do we stop? Who are we supposed to stop here? And you've got that you've got a chance to have that kind of weapons this season as well. So it's going to be fun to watch and see how this offense evolves when it comes to their run game over the next 12 months.
I think the 1-2 punch, like you said, is probably going to be one of the most dynamic we've seen in Notre Dame history. That's just the upside and the promise that the 1-2 punch has. But then, heck, this is the crazy thing. They got a 1-2 punch waiting behind them. We could be saying the same thing about 2 years.
Like, Sean, think about this. If there was a scenario where we're going into next year and Jabron Payne's your starter, and you're bringing in Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams, you're thinking those guys are young, but those guys can play
They can play now, yeah.
And Jabron's a good football player. I mean, Jabron could be Jabron's
1,000-yard rusher.
He reminds me a lot of Kyron as far as how he plays, and you're correct. Now he would do it differently.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be as explosive. It'd be more gritty.
Yeah.
A lot like Kyron, how he was in his 2 years in Notre Dame. Jabron Payne's a good football player. And if you didn't have those first two guys, we'd still be talking about Notre Dame's going to be young and unproven next year at running back, but there's some good football players there, man. And how Riley Leonard and his running ability helps that. So and that's important, Sean, because there's no guarantee that these kids are going to stay healthy next year. And when you can just say, hey, look, it sucks that we lost that guy, but man, we lose this guy and we're putting Jabron Payne in the game, or you lose that guy and you're putting Kedron Young in the game, or you lose your third down weapon. Hey, Aeneas, let's get you coached up and get you ready to play. I mean, I'll say it again. And it started with Tommy Rees and Lance Taylor. We got to give credit where credit is due. They went out and got Jadarian Price. That's who got that one. Obviously Tommy Rees played a role in Jeremiah Love, although Coach McCullough was the driving factor in that one.
Yeah.
And I've shared this story. One of the great recruiting stories that I heard was talking to someone close to Jeremiah. I'll just say I was talking to his dad. He doesn't mind me sharing this story. Talking to Jeremiah's dad, and he says, he knew a parent of another running back that Notre Dame was recruiting. And so before his in-home visit with Coach McCullough, not in-home visit. Yeah, it was maybe it might have been a Notre Dame school visit. He calls that dad. Hey, what are they telling your son? What's their thing? Have they seen about Jeremiah? And so he gets the story, and he goes to Coach McCullough, and he starts peppering Coach McCullough with these questions, trying to play gotcha. Like, you're going to tell me something that I know isn't true because I know what you told his other parent? And he goes, Brian, he had the exact same message for my son to his face as he told that other dad about how he views those kids and their face. He was straight up honest with them. Like, it wasn't like he told his kid that he was going to be the dude and he told Jeremiah. No, he told them both the same exact thing of how the priority is in the room. And he's like, when I knew that, because I guess the answer was something that's not necessarily like what you would think a coach would say to try to convince your kid to come. He says, but it was honest. He goes, and I respected him and I trusted him from that day forward. And so, so when he calls me and tells me my son needs to work on this, this, and this, I believe him, right? Because he's an honest guy. And when he tells me that my kid's going to be this, this, or this, I believe him because he's done nothing but be a man of his word. That's important, and that's why, again, somebody said in the chat, that's why you don't see a bunch of these running backs jumping in the transfer portal right now.
Yeah.
That's why you don't see Keedron Young. Keedron Young absolutely knows who Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are, Jabron Payne are. Just like I know they know who Keedron Young and Aeneas Williams are. Doesn't matter, man, because he's proven I can play all of you, number one. But number two, it's just that mindset as they've built this room, the way that they've built this room. And Notre Dame has turned into a program, in my opinion, that has become, hey, look, it doesn't matter who we have at running back. We're going to be good, but we're going to keep pumping out these kids year after year after year.
Yeah.
I'll say this, Sean. I'm going to have to study all the running back rooms, but I know what the rooms are going to look like, including some transfers. They're going to be making some decisions here soon, and I know where they're going to go. There's not, in my opinion, just on God-given ability, I don't know that there's a running back room in the country that I would trade for Notre Dame's on just – no, there's a lot more proven backfields. As far as just God-given ability, 1 to 5, I don't know that there's another running back room in college football that I would trade for this group of players.
I think because I know the 2 freshmen that will be sophomores at Alabama next year, from a depth standpoint, I would probably say the Alabama room would be a room that you could debate, might rival with Notre Dame.
I just don't think the top level talent at Bama's.
No, you talk about Williams and those other guys, they don't compare to Jeremiah Love. But they're young guys, very comparable.
Yeah. What's the kid from Georgia's name? I always forget his name. He played a little bit for them. They obviously had the young kid.
They got Justice Haynes.
Yes, because obviously they got Richard Young last year.
Right?
And then Justice Haynes. And I wasn't super high on Justice Haynes coming out of high school, Sean, but when I watched him in Alabama's spring game, I'm like, okay. Then I watched his senior film. I was like, okay, this kid, he's a little better than I thought he was going to be.
Yeah, you can see why he was in front of Young on the depth chart, and like you said, got some run behind those veteran running backs that they have. So top end at the top, I agree with you. And then other than that, I know ETN is probably going to land at Georgia.
Yeah.
So that will definitely elevate their room because I like the Edwards kid, but he's a grinder. Right. And they lose Milton. So they'll have Edwards and that kid, ATN. And then I'm sure they're going to have some young guys coming in that are going to be really good. But
they had that big Robinson kid. It was a freshman this year. Bronson Robinson's a big boy. Yeah, they'll have some guys. And then Penn State, of course, has as good of a 1-2 as anybody.
1-2 punch as anybody up top. Yeah. So they'll be in the running. Notre Dame would definitely be in the running.
Yeah.
They'll be in the running.
What's funny is ETN didn't even lead Florida in rushing this year. Like, he's a good back. But 753 yards, 5.8 per carry, 8. He's good running back. But if you said, hey, you could have Trevor Etienne right now, but you got to give up Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price. Sorry, not doing it. Would I think about it for a second? No, I wouldn't. I'm good. So that's how good this backfield can be, Sean. I mean, the talent is just and Dylan McCullough did it in a hurry. He got Price in that. Price committed to Coach Taylor and Coach Reese. But Coach McCullough got hired, convinced him, hey, look, still love you and all that. And then he went and got Jabron Payne. And then the very next year he goes out and gets Jeremiah Love. And then, of course, gets Keedron Young and Aeneas Williams. I mean, he has rebuilt it in a hurry, man. And props to him and the offensive staff for making it happen because – and the other thing, too, Sean, is this. Well, we haven't talked enough. We've mentioned Dylan McCullough as a recruiter. But the other part of it, too, is it's these kids are going to come in and get pushed and challenged and coached by Dylan McCullough. I mean, that's the one thing we knew when he got here. I don't know if he's going to recruit to Notre Dame. I mean, it's a different animal than Indiana and USC. It's just, can he, you think he will, but you need to see. But there was never a question of like, gee, is Dylan McCullough a good coach or not? That was the one thing we knew. This guy knows how to coach running backs. And now you're giving him the talent that he's going to have now. That's where we start getting a little bit excited, man. And it's a group, too, that's important, Sean, is we'll get into the offensive line in a little bit. When your offensive line is young and kind of building, they're not going to be perfect out of the gate. you've got a quarterback and running backs that can kind of make them right. And we've seen that. I mean, Jadarian had a run this year. I think it was at home. I think it might have been Pitt or Wake, where he's kind of running and there's like pressure in the back, but he kind of bounces it and outruns the defense to the sideline. And you're like, okay, you know what I mean? It's like there's going to be times when the O-line doesn't do what they need to do, but these backs are so good, and the quarterback with what he can do in the read zone, that it's like you can protect that line a little bit early as they start to gel.
Yeah.
Because you have those kind of guys, and again, you only got to block it up one or two times. And it's, I mean, Josh Adams that way. There'd be games where Josh is like 2, 3, -1, -2, 4, 12, 80.
Boom. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where Audric was like 6, 7, 9, 25.
Right.
I mean, he was so efficient as a runner. These guys are like -2, +2, 80. You know, and boy, you start getting fired up about what they can be.
Man, heck yeah, you get fired up. I'm like, yo, look. So I can't tell on myself, but you know what happened this spring, mistakenly? I wish it happened today. You know how I got mistaken for? I wish it happened today, because I wanted to kind of be a fly on the wall in practice.
If I don't get at least 100 texts from you, we're not going to be friends anymore. That's basically what it would have been.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yep, that'd have been great. That'd have been great. Well, actually, Sean, I did have someone there today that I know that sent me some messages, and I'm only going to give people one thing that he told me publicly, and then we're going to move on to the next position. So I knew that they were at practice today, and I just got a text from a friend of mine out of the blue. I didn't ask him to send me anything. I would never ask someone who I know is going to be at practice, hey, man, could you tell me some stuff? I just think that's improper. You know what I mean? But if they want to offer it, I'm not going to say no. He just texted me this, and you're going to like this one. I'm just sitting there, minding my own business, writing some articles, and this text just comes across my thing. He just says, CJ Carr is going to be special. I said, well, what makes you say that? And he goes, I'm in practice right now. So the ball comes off his hand different. He goes, I don't know anything about quarterback play, but he's different. And you're like,
you know what that means? You know what that means, Brian? Kid's been studying the playbook.
That's right.
He's coming in throwing with confidence.
And he's got it.
He's got it.
That's the thing. You know, and you start getting excited because between him, Minchie, and Deuce, you know at least one of them's going to be really good.
Yeah.
And that's why you always recruit quarterback every year.
Yeah.
Because you never know who's going to be ready or not. And you talk about, because we already know, I don't need someone to tell me that the ball comes out of Kenny Minchie's hand different.
No.
I've seen it.
I've
seen my own eyes.
Right.
I don't need you to tell me that. I haven't seen CJ in person before. So for this, it's like, okay, yeah, here we go. There we go. And that's the thing that you kind of get excited about, Sean, when you say, you know, why people have asked, I've had people ask me, why are you so excited about the future of Notre Dame football? When I know you're really like, are you not unhappy? Are you okay with how the season went? I was like, heck no.
Right.
You and I've had this conversation to show. I was like, no, I'm not making excuses for the season. I'm pissed about it. This is a missed opportunity. But you asked me why I'm still really excited about the future, because I'm like, y'all don't understand the talent this football team is about to start putting through this program.
Yeah.
Y'all do not understand. We still don't know if Marcus Freeman's an elite coach. We don't know the answer to that yet. We're hopeful. We're wishful. We think he has some of the traits that you need. He's got a lot to prove still as far as can he be an elite coach.
Yeah.
Marcus Freeman has already answered the question of can he recruit as an elite level as a head coach. That box checked. Another question that Marcus Freeman had to answer. Okay, you're a great defensive coach. We know you can recruit defensive talent, but can you be part of recruiting? And I would argue, since he's been head coach, they've brought in more offensive talent than defensive talent at Notre Dame since Marcus Freeman's been the head coach, right? And boy, you start getting a little fired up, and it's like, man, I mean, and I'm talking about speed. You know, you're talking about, you know, I mean, Aeneas Williams is going to be like your 4th fastest running back next year. Are you kidding me? Like, And I've seen that kid in person working out at a
Yeah,
camp. I've seen Jordan Marshall, who's a top 50 running back, at the same camp, and you're like, they're not even close.
not even close.
Aeneas is built better, more explosive, just a tank. And Keedron Young's a 215-pound home run hitter.
Yeah.
He's Audric with speed, is what I've said about him. And you look at receiver with Cam Williams. I mean, we're talking about legit home run hitters. We're talking about legit speed, length.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, and I don't even know that fans really get it yet, because there's still a lot of fans that look at recruiting rankings.
Yeah.
And like, I'm just telling y'all, you guys, buckle up, because if Marcus Freeman's the guy we hope he is, he's going to win a lot of games. And if he's not, whoever replaces him in 3 years is going to inherit a loaded roster. But I hope he's the one that wins with it.
You know what I love about Coach Freeman? Doesn't matter, because every year the team changes. The dynamic of the team changes, right? Leadership changes, the locker room changes, new personalities, everything changes. The message is still the same. If he talks to you, he talks to me. I got enough to win a championship. He felt like that his first year. He felt like that this year. He's going to feel like that in 24. He's probably going to have a first-time starter at quarterback in 25. He's going to feel the exact same way.
Right.
We got enough.
Right.
So, like you said, the way you feel, he feels like the last 2 years have been missed opportunities.
Sean, you could just see it with him sitting on the sidelines of
Absolutely.
They beat Wake Forest and Stanford. Just
Mm-hmm.
quickly math in my head. It's 103-30. Is that correct? They scored 56 against Stanford. No, I'm sorry, 101. Scored 45 against Wake, 56 against Stanford. That's 101-30. And the games were never really – I mean, Stanford kind of hung around in the first half because of dumb mistakes, but, like, they were never going to win that game. And it didn't matter whether they were jumping on Wake early or struggling against he just had us really – to the point where a guy that I know, a friend of mine, texts me, is like, "Is Coach Freeman okay?" And what do you mean? He's like, "He just looks not happy on side." I'm like, "I don't think he is. I think he's pissed." And this would have been a great year for him to say, "Look, man, we're just going to build around the young kids, guys. We're going to take that rebuild year." And he's like, "Screw that. All right, we got a chance to be something, but we need this guy, we need that guy, we need that guy, we need that guy. Let's go get him." And that's what I'm excited. Now you hope that he can put together the things that he needs to do to make sure that we don't have these disappointing seasons anymore, right? Like, that's the final step for Coach Freeman is, can you put the staff together and build the kind of culture that's needed for this program to see these things through and these where they've come short so far. And if he can do that, boy, but here's the thing though, your margin for error is going to be so much greater moving forward because of the talent you're bringing in. And that's the key. I mean, look, they don't have Harry Heastand anymore as the offensive line coach. So I don't know how well the offensive line is going to be coached moving forward. But you know what I do know? They're going to be massive and they're going to be really talented, right? I mean, I don't know how good of a coach Mike Brown's going to be, but you know what? He's going to have some absolute dudes to work with, right? I know Mike Mickens can coach, and I know the floor of who Al Washington can be, right? And we haven't seen him yet really with his guys. We'll start to see a little bit more of that next year on the edge, at least, not inside, but on the edge at least. And so there's still a lot of question marks in that regard, Sean, that Coach Freeman's going to have to answer. But there's zero doubt that this next 5 years of Notre Dame football is going to be the close. And this is going to sound very homerish. I know it because I just heard me say it in my head. But again, I'm not talking about wins and losses. I don't know what that's going to look like. But just speed, length, athleticism, depth of talent. We won't have seen anything like this since the 90s, the early 90s, where you're just like, lose that guy at running back, you're fine. Or this guy transferred out because he's a great back. He's going to go somewhere and be a 1,000-yard rusher, but he was fourth on the depth chart there. I mean, we're going to see that, in my opinion. Now, can they coach him up and maximize the wins? Don't know. But this team is going to be loaded these next 4 or 5 years, Sean. And that's where you start getting excited. Really start getting excited. Little bit of news we did not discuss, Sean, which I forgot also broke Thursday night while I'm sitting at dinner. Comes across my phone. Riley Mills is going to be coming back next
Yeah.
season. So now there's one more guy we're waiting on. Feel good there. But the potential of, gee, what's this room going to look like next year? What's the defense going to look like next year with all the losses? We knew Cam was leaving. DJ Brown's out of eligibility. Javonte Jean-Baptiste is out of eligibility. You're going to lose JD Bertrand. You're going to lose Marist. But you lose Howard and Riley, you're in a rebuild type of
Yeah.
situation. Getting Riley Mills and Howard Cross back next year is a great foundation to build your defense around next season. And
Yeah.
also, people ask, well, what about Xavier Watts? It's a lot more incentive for Xavier to come back now. No, he's got Morrison on that side, Christian Gray on that side, and those dudes up front. All right, we got a chance to still be special next year on defense.
Yeah. I am overjoyed, man, that these young men are coming back. And you would think part of that is a reasonable expectation that something great can happen. That had to be part of their thinking. Howard Cross, Riley Mills, Jack Kaiser, even Xavier Watts, as you mentioned, we're still waiting on his decision. There has to be something in there to where they feel like, yo, next year can really be it. It can really be the special season we all came here to experience and to get to and take this program to. And so, with that being said, when you saw the Riley Mills, um, dude, is it fair to say Riley Mills and Howard Cross represent what it means to outplay what people say you're supposed to
For
at Notre Dame?
for
What I
one
mean,
of them,
Howard Cross, but see, Riley Mills, once again, is a guy that started outside, right?
we
Had to
started inside, then moved outside.
moved outside, then picked up weight.
Right.
Now he's at 300. He's going through all these transformations, right?
Yeah, outside in high school, inside
Right.
his first 2 years, back out the end, back to tackle. Yes,
Right.
correct.
And so now with Howard Cross, like, yo, it's 280 pounds, right? And these dudes literally as a combination, they're like the best at pressuring the quarterback, right? You look at their numbers and sacks and you're like, okay,
Right.
that might not be the guys that can like just literally push the
Sure.
interior lineman back into the lap of the quarterback, but they find a way,
Well,
whether it's stunts,
yeah.
getting into cracks, to be effective, impact the game. And Howard Cross with each year has kind of, like we said, I think we said it earlier this week on the show, like, okay, we thought Howard Cross would be, he could be
Nice,
he could
solid
be good,
depth guy.
nice solid depth guy. And
Sure.
it's like, yo, he comes out this year and it's like, yo, it was almost like we were disappointed when he had an off game.
Right.
Like, and that's how you know a kid.
And
is
his
really
version of
playing
an
good.
off game is kind of like, that's still pretty good from what we've seen in the position in past years.
Exactly.
Well, here's the thing, they weren't super disruptive from the standpoint of they didn't pile up a lot of tackles for loss and sacks. The starting defensive tackles this year combined for 11.5 tackles for loss this season. And they only combined for 3.5 sacks. Cross had 1, Mills had 2.5. But they led to, if you watch Riley Mills' highlight tape when he's coming back, there's like 4 or 5 plays on there where the guy steps away from Riley and somebody else is there to sack him, right? One thing they'll have to get better on next year is they do need to get better at making more plays on the ball from a disruptive standpoint. But part of the reason, because here's an interesting thing, like Notre Dame this year, if you look at their numbers, they had a very odd statistical situation this year. So last year, Notre Dame gave up 23 points a game. They dropped a touchdown off of that this year, and they gave up 16.6 against what I would argue is a little bit tougher schedule than last year, just top to bottom. The offenses they played last year at the top were better than the offenses they played this year at the top, but there was much better depth this season. But you give up a touchdown less per game. Your defensive overall, you went from 329.3 points per game or yards per game to 282.2. You go from 5.2 yards per play to 4.4 yards per play. Having said that, they had significantly fewer tackles for loss and significantly fewer sacks this season than they did last season because it was just a steady, high level of play. Next year, you'd like to see them be more disruptive. But here's an interesting statistic. I went back and looked at this and counted this up, Sean. And so I took the starting 2, and then I took the depth at the position. And going back to 2014, because that's when Notre Dame moved to a 4-down line. because it's hard to compare to 2013 because, or 2012 because Cap and Stephon were both edge players, technically. Or you could have counted them both as interior guys, depending on how you wanted to look at it. But it's just different type of production. But going back to 2014, the most total tackles that Notre Dame got from the two starting defensive tackles was 86 in 2017. And they had 109 this season. In 12, now keep in mind that 86 counted 13 games. This 109 is only in 12. The last 5 years, the starting defensive tackles combined for 62, 77, 36, 47, and 52 tackles. They've doubled it up. So they did make a lot more plays on the ball, like at the line of scrimmage. Now it's about making more of those plays where you have a chance to finish. Because if Riley Mills would have finished on half the plays he missed on, he's at like 9, 10 tackles for loss and 5, 6 sacks. I mean, he really is. That's part of the learning process, coming off the edge as opposed to right up the middle. But those disruptions led to other Howard Cross making plays and then vice versa. And they would help the edge players. The total defensive tackle depth chart had 155 tackles this year in 12 games. The next closest they had was in 2021 when they had 129 in 13 games. And then prior to that, the 5 years prior to that, it was 71, 86, 88, 109, 114. And then the 2 years before that was 80 and 94. So what you've seen since Marcus Freeman has arrived is a lot more on-ball production, consistent play after play, not the tackles for loss and sacks, but just the consistent on-ball production from the running back, from the defensive line, which is a complaint that we had for years because it was always like, they're the closest to the line. Let them eat. And they did that this year. That was one of my beefs with Al Golden last year. It's like, stop using the defensive line to occupy blocks for your linebackers. People say, man, why did J.D. Bertrand not have a very good year this year? Like, his tackle production went way down. I mean, J.D. in 2021 averaged, 7.8 tackles per game. Last year had 82 in 12 games. This year in 11 games, he had 75. And your next leading, you had Marist had 58 last year. Jack had 58. Marist had 51. Your top 4 guys were non-defensive linemen this year. It's like Jack had 59, but Marist only had 44. And you just didn't. And you're like, what happened? Nothing happened. The guys closest to the ball made more plays. So they were making tackles before JD or Jack or Marist or Xavier or whoever else could get there. And we've seen that kind of growth. Marcus Freeman had 129 his first year, and then this past year 155, and that's in one fewer game. So that's something we've seen too, and that's something that you can expect now to continue since you're getting so much of that position group back next season. And yeah, you're losing Nana and Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who had 47 tackles this year. Javonte did. Nana had 20, so that's 67 tackles from that big end position. So you had a lot of production this year, Sean, from a pure tackle standpoint from your defensive line. Jordan Patel had 27. Josh Burnham had 16. Junior Tulamaka had 10. So that's a lot of tackles from your defensive line. Much more than we're used to seeing Notre Dame get. And so to see them go out this season and do that, and now almost all of that's coming back next year, man, it's exciting because I've said before, Sean, if you cannot be a championship defense if you're not good right up the middle, now Notre Dame's going to have a great chance to be an elite interior defensive line.
And that's in every sport. It's funny how that resonates through every single sport. Like the best
catcher,
way to get
shortstop, center field. Yep.
You get good up the middle, all of a sudden, everything else seems to be great all around it, right? Because even I think about the Blackhawks, and everybody talks about the beauty of Patrick Kane. It's like, hey, Jonathan Tays at center was the guy. Like, he was the anchor, and that's why he wore the C on his chest. And you talk about Notre Dame and his defense, man, you want to talk about the ceiling for this Notre Dame defense next year. You don't even ask us. Do they have a chance to be better than this year? Yes.
Sure. Yes. They absolutely have a chance to be better.
And it's like, yo, what? Go ahead.
Somebody in the chat's like, Sean just lost Brian. Because you start talking about hockey, and they
Yeah.
know, like, I don't have a freaking clue what he's talking
Oh,
about. Like, oh, yeah, sure, Blackhawks. Yeah,
don't
sounds
worry.
great.
I
You
didn't stay there too
you
long. I brought it right
making
back.
stuff up, and I'd be like, yeah, sure, sounds great. And I'm like, I don't have a clue what the heck he's talking.
Man, look, you gave the baseball reference. I threw a little hockey in there.
Yeah, it's all good,
It's
man.
all good. We
I had to
bring it
go with a
right back.
sport I knew.
We bring it right back to Notre Dame, and there we are. But no, it is absolutely astounding that the feeling around the program and in the fan base just a little bit over 2 weeks ago. And now to sit here on this Saturday evening and after that practice today and to hear things and to see how things are going in the portal and yo, signing day in a couple of days, and it's like, dude, I it was funny on a recruiting show yesterday. I literally said, man, I got to talk to Brian about my assignment for the first spring practice. I said, because my assignment is usually defensive line and wide receivers. I said, there's some other competitions I want to watch. I said, I might have to talk to him about getting reassigned this spring.
Yeah.
You know? But that's
like what I was supposed to watch this, but I'm just gonna be real with you. I didn't.
Right.
But can I say something else about this too?
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing, Sean, that I'll say is this. We're worried about the offensive line next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Young. Well, this is the kind of D line that's going to be great for Joe Rudolph and Jared Parker to get a really good gauge on how they're developing.
Mm-hmm.
Because in spring practice, fall camp, I mean, they just said that they're just now moving to, scout team stuff now, but the first 5-6 practices were good on good, right?
Mm-hmm.
You talk about the 15 spring practices, all good on good. Like somebody in the chat last week was like, well, first team offenses and defenses don't ever go against each other. I'm like, they absolutely do. All spring, the first 2 to 2.5 weeks of fall camp is nothing but good on good. So there's a lot of reps you're getting in good on good. But it's kind of like what Mike Elko said about the D line in 27 or the O line in 2017. It was the reverse.
Mm-hmm.
He called them human lie detectors. It's like, if you're not ready, we knew exactly how good we were.
Yeah.
Right. And it's going to be the other way around. So like when you look at this young offensive line, like if they go out there and have a good day in fall camp, you're like, hey, we might be all right. We might be okay because we've had a couple pretty good days in a row on the offensive line, and we're doing that against those dudes.
Yeah.
We're going to be all right. And that's a good thing because, hey, you can't get away with stuff we've seen in the past, Sean, where, like I think part of the reason that the defensive line struggled early in 2021 is because they have a little bit of an inflated sense of how good they were because they had been dominating a pretty bad offensive line all camp.
Yeah.
And then it took them a couple games to figure out, like, okay, and then they were fine, right? But then you look at the 2017 D-line, and it's like they didn't think that there was a question, like, how good are these guys really? But like, hey, we're going to be fine because I promise you we're never going to play an offensive line like that on a Saturday. And they were correct. And so they could go toe-to-toe with Georgia and keep Georgia in check and knock and stalemate or win some battles because they're like, dude, we've been going against our O-line every day. We're fine. And so that's going to be something that's really important for this offensive line as well, is having Riley Mills back, having Howard Cross back. And then it could be a thing where Billy Strouth is getting his butt kicked and Howard can go up and talk to him. Hey, man, listen, this is what's going on. Every time you do this, I know you're going to do this and I can counter with this. That's part of development that goes on with good football teams. But you're not listening to Donovan Heinisch tell you that, or Armel Mukum tell you that, or Devin Houston tell you that, even though they may know exactly what they're talking about. You're like, dude, you're a freshman or you're a sophomore, right? You're a young guy. But when Howard Cross is, now you may listen to Donovan in 2 years tell you that because he's going to be a veteran, right? But you're going to listen. But when Riley Mills tells you, hey, man, here's why I'm kicking your butt every day. Try this, try that. That's where you want to be honest with you. And so that's where this D-line too is I believe that being really good here can make you better on the other side of the ball. Because this is, hey, look, if we can handle these guys, we can handle anybody on our schedule. can believe that. And that's another area where they can be great benefit.
I think that is, like I said, I think the offensive line for me, so it's not a worry for me. It's a question. It's a question mark. And we'll see what the answer ends up being. Do they become a really good offensive line? Do they become okay? They're good enough. Like they offensive line next year does not need to be the 2017 offensive line for Notre Dame to win games.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. So now, me knowing that, and my expectation is already, me. I'm like, dude, I don't expect that O line, as young as they are, to come out firing. Okay, they have the talent to where if they click, okay, they click. But I would expect to put a little bit more on Riley Leonard and the wide receivers early. And the running game might not be to the level that it gets to throughout the season. But that's a far cry from what we've seen, where you lean on the running game early at Notre Dame and try to develop the passing game as the season goes on. And so, what we might see might be unconventional as far as the Notre Dame offense, because that offensive line, and it's not that they're not good enough or talented, they're young. And the more games they play, the better they will get. A great example we see before us. You go watch that young Alabama offensive line, watch them the first 2 or 3 games, and you'll say, ugh.
Yeah.
You'll laugh at Caden Proctor like,
Yeah.
oh, I thought you were supposed to be the dude. And then go watch Caden Proctor and Latham against Georgia.
You and I were talking about that today.
Yeah.
I've never seen Georgia get bullied like that since Kirby really got there.
No.
It looked like Notre Dame USC 2017.
And that's so. I'm not worried about the offensive line, right? I wouldn't use the word worried. Question, yes. Intrigued to see how it turns out, yes. But I think this is a year that kind of sets up because of, and I think they've done a great job of identifying and understanding, like, okay, if we're going to have this issue, this is the best way to support this issue. Like, if we're going to have a young offensive line, let's get the veteran quarterback behind that offensive line instead of a young quarterback behind the offensive line, and then give the veteran some veteran productive wide receivers outside, so we can lean on this passing game and develop that, because we know the running backs are good enough, but
the quarterback can run.
Yeah, so we'll impact it that way. That is something that I think they've done a great job of looking down the road, mapping out, and saying, okay, this is how we can really attack 2024 offensively and allow this offensive line, this young, inexperienced offensive line, to get better as a seat. Because, like we said, this is a great schedule to play a young quarterback. Well, this is a great schedule to play a young offensive line.
One thing I know for sure, Sean, when we get to the final open practices of the fall, we'll have a pretty good idea of how good the offensive line is because of what we saw, what we are expecting to see from the defensive line. Now, Mr. Davis, let's talk about the final bit of good news that we heard today. And that is, speaking of the offensive line, that Notre Dame will have a new starting left tackle in the bowl game, which we knew, but not the left tackle that we thought. I mean, honestly, Sean, I just assumed, and apparently the person who asked the question, I believe it was Tim Priester asked the question. Tim had the same assumption that I had and that you had. We're just going to plug in the guys that were listed as backups all year in the bowl game. Tosh Baker, left tackle, Emil Wagner, right tackle. That's what I thought. We talked about in our shows. And then Coach Freeman was like, well, actually, Charles Jagusah is going to be starting a left tackle in the bowl game. Not because of any injury. He basically said, listen, we were moving guys around in the early part of fall of the bowl practices, and he just kind of established himself. And he talked about how much he'd grown sort of late in the year, because the last time we saw Charles playing, which is in the last game Notre Dame played, he was playing guard. Last few times we saw him, he was playing guard. We didn't see him take a snap at offensive tackle. But apparently a little bit of the light bulb went off to the point where not only is he getting the first team reps at left tackle, they have moved Tosh Baker, who spent all year as the backup left tackle, to right tackle to battle with Emil Wagner. to see who's going to start in the bowl game. And so that was some very big news because it tells me two things, Sean, first and foremost. Number one, it tells me that Charles is a little bit ahead of schedule. And what I mean by that is between the injury that he suffered last year, which kept him from wrestling, kept him from enrolling early, kept him from being at spring practice and all that, kind of had him a little needed to get in shape in fall camp. Let's be honest. He's a big boy, but he was looked like a 300-plus pounder that had, was recovering from a knee injury. They just always get a little bit softer in the middle part of their body. It's natural. It's not a criticism. But he also is a guy that's kind of still raw. I mean, he missed all of his sophomore season because of COVID. It was kind of raw as a junior right tackle, moved to left tackle as a senior and really broke out. But it was just the breakout had a lot to do with improved technique, but he still needed a lot of growth. So to see him in just one season with no spring ball and when I say no spring ball, it's not he was there and just couldn't practice. He wasn't even in school during spring ball. And he lives in a part of Illinois where he can't just come to practice every morning for spring ball. Like if he was in Chicago or something like that, he could have been in a lot of those spring practices, or at least been a lot of the meetings. He's from a part of Illinois where he couldn't be here a lot during the spring. And so you're talking about a kid that an offensive lineman that did not have spring ball that has kind of stepped in as like, okay, he's the new left tackle over a guy that's a senior that the coaches that I've talked to and the people in the program I've talked to have raved about Tosh Baker the last 2 years. He was solid in the games he saw, but it wasn't like, okay, boy, that's the dude. There's a little bit of question mark there. That's the first thing it tells me. Charles has started. The light has gone off a little bit sooner in this. Here's the second thing it tells me. This offensive staff, whoever's driving this decision, whether it's Coach Rudolph, Coach Parker, Coach Freeman, all of them combined, talking through it, whoever's making the decision, it tells me this coaching staff is willing to take a little bit of risk when it comes to elite players. Charles Jagusah is an elite talent, but he's a very raw, unproven elite talent. I think he played what? I'm going to look it up, Sean. I mean, a small handful of snaps this season. I think he played in like 3 games.
3 games, yeah.
I'm going to pull it up right now. So he's going to take a red shirt. But Charles Jagusah this season, Sean, played in – it actually says 1 game, and he had 5 snaps. Now, I thought he played in 2. I'm going to have to go back and look in that. But he didn't play a whole lot this season. And he stepped in, and they said it was a Stanford game. I could have swore he got into one of the earlier games, but I'll have to go back and watch and see for sure. But basically, it tells me they're willing to – because I've said this to you. I'll just be honest for you. I don't think that this is a move that Brian Kelly would have made. I don't know if this is a move the previous coaching staff would have made, taking a guy like Charles and just saying, we're going to throw you in there. And now we're going to throw you in there. We're going to take the guy that was there that's experienced, that has started games at left tackle, and move him to the other side because this is your job now as a true freshman. I don't know that we would have seen that in the bowl game. I don't know if we would have seen that next fall, much less the bowl game. Yeah. So that kind of fired me up a little bit too, Sean. They know there's going to be some growing pains in this bowl game with Charles.
Oh, absolutely.
But they're like, dude, we got to do it. This kid's the future, right? And you just kind of answered a question about who's going to be your starting left tackle next year is no longer a question mark.
No, and that's fantastic. That's just as big as not going into the spring with a quarterback battle, right? Like that gives your team to know, yo, this is the leader, this is the guy, and it's the same thing with that quarterback and that left tackle. Like this is the guy, you're the guy on the island. And look, I don't know about you, Brian. Some people, they open up that video game for the first time, they play Madden, and they put it on the lowest level, right? Because they want to have success.
Get used to the game, how to play.
I'll put it on all Madden. Like, I don't mind if I take an L the first game, that's making me better. I don't mind playing on the toughest level from the jump. And that's why I asked about the bookend pass rushes for Oregon State. I wanted to be tough for Charles Jagusah his first time. I think with Blake Fisher going down to Doak Campbell and that atmosphere, that's how you get welcome to college football. Those type of atmosphere and games, that's what's going to make you better in the long run. And this Sun Bowl is going to make Charles Jagusah better in the long run. He's going to take a step from that game going into spring camp, and then he's going to take another step going into fall camp. And who we see show up against Texas A&M probably going to be a totally different. He's already massive, but now you give him another offseason to get healthier, because that was one of the biggest concerns, his health coming off the injury. You get him healthier, give him stronger, shape his body. Now 6'7", 330, or whatever he is, it's like, okay, now we talked about this. Now the amount of weight on that left side next year and what they can do in the run game as they mature. What do you think? Now, we talked about this. The one thing that we can probably share, because we had the same sentiment. We wondered if he could play left tackle at Notre Dame after his junior year, watching his film. We were like, yo, you were like, Sean.
That's why he wasn't a 5-star for me, honestly.
Yeah. You're like, Sean, I don't know if he can play left tackle. I'm like, BD, I see what you're saying. I agree. And then all of a sudden, he puts in work over the summer, and he comes back for the senior season on a bad team, mind you. And he's dominating on both sides of the ball, showing an increased level of quickness, footwork, athleticism, comfort.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, yeah, he can play left tackle with Notre Dame. Like, we see it now. And we expected that and had high expectations coming, and he just had a fallback because we wished that he was coming in early, but he wanted to defend his championship in the state of Illinois in wrestling at heavyweight. That's the only reason he stayed.
And then he hurt his knee.
Then he hurts his knee. He still tries to enroll early, missed the deadline, has a rehab on his own, right? Because of some funky rule or whatever, and really couldn't be locked in. Can you hear me, Brian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can hear you.
Because the picture froze. That's why.
Yeah, I see your picture froze as well.
And he's locked in, and they move him to guard. And I was saying, I don't think the move to guard was really about him. I think it was like, yo, this might be the quickest route to see. If
no, it was about him, but in a positive way.
In a positive way.
Right. Yeah. It was, this kid's really good, and right now, there's not a path to tackle for him in 2023.
Right. That's exactly where I was headed. Like, in the quickest path for him to get on the field, if he shows us some things during the year, is at guard, and then all of a sudden he's given the opportunity to go out and compete at tackle, and he locks right back in. It goes back to the words you just said. He's comfortable at that position. And that left tackle is kind of like cornerback in a sense. It's one of those positions where you're on an island.
Right.
More than likely against a really good athlete.
And people usually only notice you when you get beat.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm excited, man. I'm excited to see him go up against some really good competition. I believe in the talent. I believe in his size and his ability. And he probably might have 3 to 5 plays where he might.
Oh, he's going to have those minutes. Oh, he's going to have those moments.
Yeah, he might get called for holding. Okay. But in the long run, this is a great moment. This is a great moment for, what his program, like you said. I don't think Brian Kelly elevates him above a Tosh Baker that's been in the program.
Because when they put Blake Fisher and then Joe Alt in their left tackle, it's kind of like they didn't really have a lot of other options. So while Sean kind of restarts his computer and gets back in, I want to talk about Charles as a player. So, we've talked about the news. Notre Dame's moving Charles Jagusah to left tackle, starting him in the bowl game, which is huge. And you finally get your answer a little bit on who is the left tackle going to be next season. Well, let's talk a little bit about why we're fired up about that. And I'll tell you, first and foremost, what I Sean and I were joking with before this afternoon, because when he was doing his show earlier, I tried calling him because I thought their show was over. And then he calls me back and after the show was over, and we're talking about the news and just kind of everything that's went on. And one thing I said to him was like, it's funny, you've got a guy at left tackle this year that was 6'8", 320 pounds, and you're probably going to go into the next season with a guy that's even bigger at left tackle. Now, Charles isn't as tall as Joe Alt, but he's long and he's thicker. He is a natural 320-plus pounder. He was listed on the roster this year at 330. I could see maybe him losing 5-10 pounds maybe early on in the spring, just getting a little bit of that baby fat off and then putting it right back on in like really solid muscle. next season, but this is a large human being. When we saw him in the spring, not in the spring, in fall camp, you're just like, boy, you can go back and listen to some of our post-practice shows from the spring, and you're like, that's a dude. That is an absolute behemoth at offensive tackle. And so you start getting kind of excited about, the kind of player he can be. And so yeah, I'm really fired up about that. I do need to kind of interrupt real quick. So Jason Smith, I accidentally muted, like put you in timeout for 5 minutes. I was trying to put the guy ahead of you in timeout for 5 minutes. So Jason Smith, you didn't do anything wrong. That was me trying to do that while I was talking. So I apologize. You were not supposed to go on timeout there. So my bad about that. So I don't really like people speculating about who's going to transfer out. So I was trying to click the guy right ahead of you. So apologies on that, Jason. So when your 5 minutes is up, please forgive me, buddy. You were not meant to be muted. So when Sean mentioned earlier about my thought process on Charles Jagusah, when they first started recruiting him, I had him as I believe as a 4-star top 100 kind of kid, creeping up on that 4.5-star top 50 range because you love the skill. You love the size. I mean, he was listed at 6'6", he was listed at 300, but you just kind of saw a guy that had a lot of ability, guy that had some length, guy that had some girth. Comes in Notre Dame, he's 330, but when you watch Charles play, you're seeing a really physical kid. You're seeing a really powerful kid. You're seeing a guy that likes to punish people. He was just very raw. He was just a guy that was still very much learning the position. He was a guy that didn't necessarily, I mean, like I said, didn't know what he was capable of or kind of how to play the game as a junior. He was really just getting by on just God-given ability. And then when you go out and you watch him play as a senior, even though, as Sean talked about, he played on a not very good football team, the thing you liked about him was you saw a kid that could just dominate, and you saw a kid that was much more comfortable on the edge. And so, you talk about the traits that Charles brings to the table. He's big, he is physical, he's powerful, and that's the most obvious trait. And that's why we've said, maybe he's a guy that ends up playing guard and is a starting guard because he could just be a Quentin Nelson type of just destructive guard that can move and dominate people. And that was kind of, honestly, I saw him as a right tackle guard when Notre Dame first recruited him and first landed him, and like an elite, like big time right tackle guard, but just not a left tackle, or at least I didn't know that he could be a left tackle. And so he comes out as a senior, and as Sean mentioned, he starts putting out these workout videos of him he was getting some personal instruction, starting to look more comfortable in pass pro, showing the foot quickness on the perimeter. He's also a pretty good high school defensive lineman, but you saw a kid that could change direction. You saw a kid that had the nimble footwork at that size to really come out and handle himself on the edge. We didn't get a chance to see him do a lot of that in fall camp because they were playing him at guard and tackle and move him all over. But what you could see when he was in the game was a guy that was a pretty athletic kid, and a guy that's to me a longer, more physical version of Blake Fisher that fits more naturally at that left tackle position. He's athletic, he can move his feet, he's a finisher. He's a guy that even if he is a step too slow out of his stance, or if a guy's just a little too quick for him, has that kind of length and punch to be able to recover and dominate. And so as a senior, even though he still had a lot of technical work to do, he was a guy that you could just see utter dominance, just absolute dominance from him. And that's why we ranked him as a 5-star. And look, if you actually, you know what I'm going to do, guys? I'm going to actually pull up one of his senior highlights now, because it was really fun to watch. I mean, it's literally nothing but just him putting people on the ground the entire game. So let me try to pull this video up real quick so you guys can have some fun watching it. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to pull that up, because for those of you that are watching live and on the YouTube channel, you'll be able to see this. If you're listening via podcast, check out the video, because it'll be worth your time. So let me just see if StreamYard is going to cooperate with me today. And see, that always does that. It's not letting me bring it up today. I'm really just tired of StreamYard. Let me try this again here real quick. This may not let me do it. Bear with me, everybody. I'm going to try to get this figured out. Let's see if they'll let me do it this way. Present. Need to hire a tech person that'll let me help with these things. Let's see if we can pull this sucker up. There we go. All right, let's see if we can do it this way. All right, does this work? All right, let me see if it'll let me do it this way. There we go. Had to find an end around. So I'm just going to let Charles's film play while we're talking, and you guys are going to see what I'm talking about. This is a kid that is just absolutely punishing. I mean, it's like pancake, 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 pancake. And it's really fun to watch. You'll also see a lot of technical work that's needed, but you'll see a guy that's got really nice feet, a guy that has not very good footwork, but very nice feet. And that's obviously a positive that you want to see. The tools are all there, and you guys will see it watching this video. The tools are all there for him to be a phenomenal player. It's just about him needing to learn the technical parts. And so if he's ready to play in the bowl game, and again, I don't expect him to look like Joe Wald as a freshman in his first game, but it's the reps he's going to get from this standpoint, as far as just all the practice reps with the first team, the communication, the pressure that comes with it. Then you talk about going into fall camp, kind of in that pole position at left tackle. Those are going to be invaluable reps for him. And the pressure of playing in a game is going to be invaluable for him. And then you're also talking about a guy that was an undefeated state champion wrestler. So he understands at his size, you can't do that unless you know how to get low. And so when his technique is right, he can play with really good pad level, which is very important. So as you're going to see here, if you're an offensive line coach sitting at home, you're probably like, boy, I'd fix that. I've got to fix that. He's got to correct that, get better at that. And you'd be absolutely right. But what's fun to watch is just the absolute dominance with the way that he plays the football game. And that's what you see. You see a guy that is just absolutely dominant playing the football game. And so those are the things that we looked at when Notre Dame was recruiting him is, yeah, this kid needs work. At the time, we're like, but he's going to be coached by Harry Eastan. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you, that was probably one of my biggest regrets when Coach Eastan left. Was like, man, I just had this vision of Harry Eastan coaching up Charles Jagusah for 3-4 years, and just what that would mean. And Coach Rudolph's got to prove himself, but man, he's working with a big ball of clay, man, a really big ball of clay that has a lot of talent, Sean. And so I just was kind of showing the folks why he ended up becoming a 5-star kid for me. As you guys saw, almost every clip, and that's the first 4 games. That's it. Yeah. That's just his first 4 games highlights. That's not even a full season highlights. Every other play is just pancake, pancake, pancake. The kid's got loads and loads of potential. He is far from a finished product. I just want to warn people of that in the bowl game. He is far from a finished product, but the tools are outstanding. And he's got a chance, if he puts in the work and he gets coached up properly, of being a very special player at Notre Dame. And I'm just excited that we're going to get our first chance to really see him.
And I remember writing a story about, and this didn't even come from him. This came from his mom. I was interviewing his mom, and I remember his mom saying, yo, I think the most impressive thing for me was watching my son in a multiple hour film session with Harry Eastan on his visit. And just to watch how engaged he was with Coach Eastan, and for me to sit back, and she was like, yo, it made me, because I know his aspirations of, like, this is a young man that wants to play in the NFL and then be in the front office executive. Like, he knows exactly what he wants to do. Like, he's locked in. He knows the path he wants to go. Exec and possible ownership. Like, that is where he wants to go. And for her to see in that moment and be impressed with how Coach Eastan was able to get him, because he's a very quiet kid. He's a very quiet kid into himself. And to get it, that's why the family atmosphere was so important to him, and how the offensive line room moved together at Notre Dame. That was like one of the things that put Notre Dame over the top, because that's
Sean, I remember
from a small community.
I remember something that you had said when he was being recruited. You talked about how impressed he was with how well Coach Eastan coached the second team offensive line. This one's like, dude, I'm going to get coached no matter what. And it would seem, I don't know the overall job Coach Rudolph was doing, but it would seem like even though he wasn't a starter this year, that he was still getting coached up, and that's a plus. But yeah,
Absolutely.
you can get back to what you're saying though. But yes,
No,
about how
just to
he's just
finish up,
he's a different kind of kid.
he's
Yeah.
just a different kind of kid, man. And even though he is that quiet kid, I don't know how Joe Alt is, but Joe Alt doesn't come across to me as the most vocal person on the offensive line. Like he just seems like a very even mannered individual, which bodes well at left tackle because there's no high low. It's just let's go out, workman, do the job, dominate. And Charles Jagusah has that same demeanor. Like no highs, lows. I know the job, task at hand. Go out, dominate, and use this big 6'7", 330 frame to its ability and its full capability. So I just think the young man he is and the maturation we saw on the film that you showed that caused us to believe that he will eventually land here at left tackle. Like that was our expectation. Like, oh, he's the future left tackle after Joe Alt. Like, yeah, we see it. And
I'd say for me, Sean, honestly, it was more of a hope than it was a, oh yeah, it's going to happen. Just because of how raw he was and the fact that Coach
mhm,
Easton was gone. So the fact that he's already kind of established that
yeah,
has made me pretty fired up, to be honest with you. Now it's going to
yeah,
be up to Coach Rudolph and Charles to both take it to that next level. But this, like I said, this experience is going to be invaluable. And now you start fast forwarding to 2024, Sean. Like,
hmm,
okay, you know who your left tackle is going to be.
that's
You
huge.
know who your center is going to be.
That's
You know who your
huge.
right guard is going to be. We'll
Hmm.
see if they're. You know who your left guard is going to be, unless somebody else beats them out, which means you're even better.
Right.
And now your right tackle battle is now between two guys that you thought might be your starters at both
Left
tackle
tackle.
spots
Yeah.
next year
Yeah.
with Tosh and Emil. And then of course you're going to welcome in the next fall another guy who was not an early enrollee, who is more advanced even than Charles was coming out of high school, and Gearby Lambert.
Hmm.
And you want to start getting excited about the future? Start thinking about the potential someday of Notre Dame having a starting lineup of 6'7", 330 Charles Jagusah at left tackle, 6'7", 315 Gearby Lambert at right tackle, 6'4", 315 Billy Shrout at right guard, 6'5", 310-pound Ashton Craig at center, and
Yeah.
6'7", 335-pound Sullivan Absher at left guard, or 6'4", 320-pound Sam Pendleton at left guard. You
Hmm.
start getting excited about the future. That's a reason why right there.
Yeah.
Because the last class that Coach Easton brought in, and you combine it with the class that Coach Rudolph is bringing in with Peter Jones and Anthony Knapp and Styles Prescott, with
Yeah.
the class that Coach Easton just signed with Jagusah and Pendleton and Absher and Joe Otting,
Joe Otting.
and then getting Billy Shrouth in the previous class, and
And heck, his hands were on Gerby Lambert.
right, Emil Wagner,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. Coach Easton started. I mean, when Coach Easton left, it was assumed that Notre Dame was going to get Gearby,
Hmm.
and we talked about how that changed, and Coach Rudolph had to re-recruit him, and he did a great job doing so. But if Coach Easton doesn't leave, you still have Styles Prescott, you still have Peter Jones, you still have Gearby Lambert. I mean, so the future is incredibly bright. But now, Sean, you really go into next season kind of feeling like I've got a pretty good idea of who 4 of my 5 starters are going to be.
Hmm.
They've played at least one game together. The starting lineup will have a chance to have played one game together. And if a starter from the bowl game doesn't start next year, it's most
Hmm.
likely because somebody more talented beat him out. Right. So let's say Tosh Baker starts at right tackle in the bowl game. He may get beat out by Emil Wagner next year,
Hmm.
Gearby Lambert. But that means that those guys really got better. And you start looking at it and saying, hey man, this group's got a chance to be really good next season. And then there's going to be competition. Rocco Spindler comes back. He's not going to just accept the backup job. He's going to say, okay, Billy or Pat, one of the two, coach, let me compete with one of them, put me one place and let me battle. Right. That's what you're going to see from Rocco next year too. So you start getting excited, man, and I was talking about the future line. I mean, even just next year, if it's Tosh or Emil at right tackle and Billy Shrout the right guard and Craig at center and either Pat Coogan or, maybe Rocco Spindler at left guard
Yeah.
it's going to be young. They're going to have their ups and downs, but when they're on, they're going to be
They're gonna be. Oh
really
man.
on.
Woo.
And that's you start getting excited about. You really start getting excited
I'm
about
so
that.
excited because I know and I feel very confident that this offensive line, once they hit late October, November, watch out.
Yeah.
Watch out.
This goes back to the schedule we talked about, Sean.
Hmm.
It's a bit of a get right schedule. Hey, I was on my first Twitter Spaces last night, by the way. I've never been on one before.
That
And
was your
I was
first
on the
time?
SEC one. Yeah, I'd never been on one before. And the comment I made to them is like the way the schedule, it's like you got that big A&M game,
Mm.
but then your next month is kind of a get right period for Notre Dame, where you don't have. I mean, you could go out against Purdue and Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio. They're all quality programs, but let's be real. You could maybe not be great up front and still win because you're just way more talented than they are. And then you've got Louisville will come to town in game 5. We'll see what they're going to look like next year. They're going to have a much different looking team next year. We'll see what they look like. And then after that, Stanford, who's not very good. And there's rumblings that Notre Dame's actually going to make the Army game a week 0 game, which means you then have the Army game to get ready for A&M and then so forth and so on. I don't know how much I love that because now you're back to playing like 8 games without a bye. We'll see how that goes. But your 8-game stretch is a little different than this year because you won't have Ohio State in that 8-game stretch. You won't have this year's version of, Duke and Louisville in that stretch on the road. Your road games during that period of time will be a little bit more, manageable. One of your road games will be the first game of the year as opposed to later in the year. But if you talk about what it would look like if they put that as a week 0 game, you would play 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You'd play 8, 9 games before you'd play 6 games before you'd have a bye. Then you'd have a bye between Louisville and Stanford. So it's not as bad as it was this year. So it's going to be interesting, Sean. But the fact is to your point, if you can get to that A&M game, you got about a month of get right moments to kind of get this line going. And if Coach Rudolph is who we hope he is, then the offensive line, to your point, by October, November, has a chance to be pretty good. If he's not, then it'll just be this kind of group all year. That's what it'll be. And I did not like the job Coach Rudolph did this year, but I'm willing to give him sort of a let's see what he does in year 2, much like we saw with Al Washington, who I did not think it did a good job in year 1. He inherited a veteran group who had a great deal of respect for the coach that left. And I don't know if there was always the same buy-in. And then with Coach Rudolph, it's like, yeah, we like you and respect you, but you're not Coach Easton. Well, now you're going into year 2. That's naturally going to change the dynamic a little bit. Can he have the same kind of year 2 jump that we saw from Al Washington and Al Golden this past season? That's what we're going to find out. So, but if he can be the guy that I hope he's going to be, then this line has, because it's going to be young. They're going to have mistakes. They're going to be a little bit up and down. They're just going to be. But like you said, Sean, the games where they are good, they're going to be really good. And that's what you start getting excited about because they're going to be massive. It's going to be a big offensive line next year. Really big offensive line next year. So I'm excited to see what it's going to be.
Sorry about that. What's the benefit? I'm very interested in seeing, what the benefit of having that massive offensive line, how that's going to pay dividends late in the season, like that, because that ability. I talked to you about something that Tommy did, right? That he probably did because of the massive offensive line he has.
You're about
And
this year,
how,
Bama?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and how he went to unbalanced lines. And I was like, yo, how many times did Notre Dame really go unbalanced when Tommy was there? And I was like, well, offensive lines never were really massive. Like we had good players, but just never had that massive offensive line. And you started talking about the future and how massive the offensive line could be at Notre Dame. It like you said, once again, that's something Jared Parker is going to, his creative juices should be opened up by having. I mean, when was the last time we had
Notre
a
Dame
big
had
center?
2. A big center? That's, I mean, it's been a while.
Yeah,
Braxton Cave was strong. He was
right.
only like 305, 310, but Nick Martin wasn't very big. Mustapher wasn't very big. Patterson was not very big.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that I thought Notre Dame had a big offensive line twice, 15 and 17. Because in 15, you had Stanley and McGlinchey at tackle. You had Quentin Nelson and Quentin Nelson and Steve Elmer at guard, and you had Nick Martin at center. So the center wasn't real big. He was like 305,
Mm-hmm.
310, but you were big at guard and you were big at tackle. And then 2017, especially when you were trying to run the ball and you had Tommy Kramer in the game at 6'5", 315. You had Alex Bars before his injury was like 6'5", 6'6", 325.
Mm-hmm.
Mustafer was 305. Then you had Quentin Nelson at left guard at 340. And then you had McGlinchey at left tackle. So those are the two times, and those happen to be the two best offensive lines Notre Dame's had in the last decade. The 2020 team had some decent size, but they weren't quite as big. You had Aaron Banks, but Eichenberg and Hainsey weren't massive guys. They were 305-ish type of guys. But the 15 and 17 lines were very big. Very big. Last year's 2022 offensive line was pretty big. When you think about, your tackles were big. It's before Blake lost even more weight. You had Josh Lugg at guard, and so you had some size there as well. But this has a chance to be, like you said, Sean, a big, long, and massive offensive line. And what's the whole point of that? When you get into the late, and you talked about it, when you get into the late October and November, you're going to be able to bully people. Alabama, for a good chunk of this season, was a very mediocre offense. Very mediocre offense. And their offensive line was underwhelming for part of the year, but they had some younger guys, true freshmen, redshirt sophomores, they had some redshirt freshmen, they had some younger guys. And as those guys kept getting better and better and better, I mean, I'll give you the numbers, guys. From Ole Miss to Tennessee, a span of 5 games, Bama's rushing attack went for 131, 191, 193, 23, 177, 138. And then in the last 4 games of the regular season against LSU, Kentucky, Chattanooga, and Auburn, it went for 288, 159, 315, and 192. They weren't world beaters, and they had 6, 4, and 5 rushing touchdowns in those games. And, they had the weirdest stat line against Georgia, too, because if you actually look at their rushing numbers, only rushed for like 114 yards against Georgia. But they just bullied Georgia. I mean, just absolutely bullied Georgia in that game. And you're hoping that that's what Notre Dame can bring to the table in this game, with this offensive line in time, to where when you look at it by the end of the year, your hope is, boy, we got a chance to be really, really good. Really, really good when the season's over with. And you start getting kind of excited about it. You really do. So, Sean, that's going to do it for this part of the show. We are going to just answer some super chats here. We just got 6 of them, and then we're going to get going. So no mailbag today. But I just wanted to pull these up. Nate, Indy Milton fan, super chat. Thank you very, very much. Great to have some IB community time today. Love unexpected shows. Go IB. IB community equals the best community. Hashtag BK sucks has always sucked. Love it. Anthony Solomon, super chat. Thank you, Anthony. Gentlemen, thank you for the show today. Sean loved the LL show today because you're pulling a doubleheader today, Mr. Davis.
I am.
So we appreciate that. We appreciate that very much. Yeah, I called Sean earlier, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm coming on with you today." I was like, "Let's do it." Yep, he knew I was fired up. He said, "You're calling me because you're going to do a show today too." I said, "Well, I am doing a show today, but that's not why I'm calling you." But he knew. He knew. Michael S. with a super chat. Thank you, Michael. Is Logan Diggs going to be back to LSU in 2024? I have no idea. And honestly, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, Sean, I don't care. I think Logan's a good kid, and his mom strikes me as a really nice lady. But I was kind of over the whole, is he going to leave or not leave stuff at Notre Dame? And I think he's a talented back. I stopped caring about whether he was or wasn't going to transfer, be unhappy or whatever once he left, because I just kind of got tired of it. And he wasn't happy at Notre Dame. He's not happy at LSU. You start kind of thinking, maybe they're not the issue. Perhaps a little bit.
I remember hitting you from the 2023 blue and gold scrimmage. Like, what is wrong with this kid? Because of interaction I saw on the sideline. I'm like, yo, what? Like, you're right. Like, there's nothing that's going to make him happy other than making himself happy, right?
Exactly right.
He's
He's got to make the decision to say, hey, man, life's not perfect, but you make the most of it. That's the reality of it. And you weren't happy at Notre Dame. You decided to go somewhere else.
Mhm.
Make the most of it, young man, because you got all the ability in the world.
Yeah.
Just go be you, right? Trevor Rocket with a super chat. Thank you very much, Trevor, our Canadian friend, one of our many Canadian friends in the IB Nation here. Sean Trevor says, "Good evening, lads. I'm late to the show. Great to hear Jagusah starting the bowl game. What's the projected starting five in the O line? Brian and Sean, thank you for the IBLL. The last 16 months have been super tough. Thank you." Appreciate you, man. Yeah, and hope that Lindsay's doing well and still battling, of course. We're continuing praying for your wife and
Mhm.
what she's going through. We appreciate you. We kind of talked about that earlier, Sean. This super chat came in before we mentioned it. It's Jagus left to right, Jagusah, Coogan, Craig, Shrouth, and either Baker or Wagner, and then potentially a battle at left guard as well would be my hope. And if Pat Coogan genuinely wins that battle, great. If not, be willing to make the move. But now all of a sudden you say then there might be a little value to Coogan being that starter or Rocco being that starter, because it'd be nice to have a guy with a little bit of experience kind of next to Charles
Mhm.
next season as well. And then Raymond Harton with a super chat says, Jagusah, go Irish.
Mhm.
And then the last one from Trevor Rocket as we wrap up, Sean. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas. Hashtag Lindsay Tough 2024 with I being lucky lefty and Indy getting back to O-line U status. Brian and Sean, can you give me one player each stepping up in a bowl game? So let's do one player that we hope steps up in a bowl game, Sean. So I'll let you start on offense, and then I'll give my offense, and then we'll go defense. So who's the one player above all others that you hope steps up in a bowl game for Notre Dame?
I'll go ahead and take Jalen Snead. I'll go off the board a little bit.
Offense?
For offense,
Yeah.
let's see. One of the young tight ends. I'll take Eli Rare.
I'm going to go – I want to go with one of the running backs because we talked about running backs. But I'm going to go with somebody else. Last time we were in the Sun Bowl, there was a receiver that stepped up, kind of went off, guy by the name of Michael Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying Jaden Greathouse is Michael Floyd, but I have a feeling Jaden Greathouse is going to kind of come out and have a big game. I just have a feeling he's going to have a big game. I think we're going to see him outside to the field in the Z. I think we'll see him some in the slot as well. But I'm really hoping that he can be a guy that comes out and breaks out. That's my prediction. I could easily go with one of the running backs, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price. I think Eli Raridan is a good one. I'm hoping Charles Jagusah looks like a future – the next first round pick, right? Because he's a guy that has a chance to continue that high draft pick type of stuff. But, you could talk about Steve Angeli and all that, but I'm really hoping and predicting that Jaden Greathouse is going to finish the year on a very strong note. So, hey, look, all these portal guys are great, but I'm still that guy, right? And I think we'll talk about this offseason, but Jaden Greathouse emerging is huge for this team because of the guys they've landed so far and the guy that I think they're going to get. Those are really good football players. I don't know that they're necessarily holy moly, they're taking over football games. They're really good pieces on a puzzle. I still think Jagusah is the guy that they have that has the best. I'm going to go out there and be an 8-catch, 110 yards against Florida State kind of guy in that big game. And so I'm hoping that we start to see a little glimpse of that here in the bowl game against Oregon State. Yeah. And then defense, Sean, you said Jalen Snead. Go ahead and explain why you see that
over
one.
From Maris Leofow. I think he's going to finally have the opportunity to say, yo, this is my job. And I think he's going to step up and prove. And then he knows it's not like he's just getting the job and he's head and shoulders above the guys behind him. He knows. Like, there are some guys, like, at my feet, like, coming. So this is my opportunity to show that I can put a stranglehold on this position going into the spring. And I think he's going to make some big time plays and run all over the field and show how good he is.
I hope so.
Yeah,
that'd be nice. I'm gonna now become Chandra's favorite Notre Dame analyst. You might have been before, but I'm about to become it. I'm going Christian Gray. That's where I'm going. I think he's going to be playing a ton in place of Cam Hart. He's going to be going against, Anthony Gould's going to sit out, but Silas Bolden's still going to play. They're going to have some other receivers in that game. I just have a feeling Christian's going to come out and you're going to be like, man, I loved Cam Hart. Cam Hart was that dude, man, for Notre Dame. He was so good the last 2 years. But just like Audric, man, me being excited about this kid doesn't mean I didn't love what that kid did, right? And Cam Hart was special. And your hope is that Cam Hart could have left his mark on the program. And I've heard a lot of things about the kind of leadership Cam showed in that room, in the entire defense and the team this year, where it's like, boy, maybe you wish you could have had that for just one more year, right? And loved what I heard about all that. But that leadership is then going to say, I'm going to leave my mark even when I'm not there. And Christian Gray is going to take that mantle and say, this is the standard Cam set. It's now up to me to live up to it. And I think he's going to do that in the bowl game. And I'm excited to see what Christian Gray can bring to the table. Now, it'd be also awesome if it was like a Josh Burnham or a Boubacar or somebody like that up front. Would be great to see one of those young guys breaking out. You're going Jalen Sneed. I'm going Christian Gray. So those are our breakouts for the bowl game. So that's going to do it, folks. Those are the super chats. And we appreciate all y'all being with us. Good crowd on a Saturday night. We thought we said we're going to probably be a little under 2 hours, and we're now about 50 seconds past 2 hours. But we were very, very close, Sean. Very, very close. Thank you all for being with us on this this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Saturday night. We appreciate y'all. We're all very blessed to be here this evening, and I appreciate y'all being here with us. We're going to be back on Monday, 1 o'clock, with a Notre Dame football mailbag. So we'll continue to answer all your questions then. For Sean, I'm Brian. Folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you know when we're doing special shows like we did today. Subscribe to the podcast and give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast platform. And as always, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Got a lot of questions I'm going to keep answering this weekend in that football mailbag. If you jump on the board, you can ask those questions. And y'all are going to keep me busy all weekend answering those questions. I just know you are, and I'm looking forward to it. So for Sean, I'm Brian. Have a great rest of your evening, everybody, and we'll see you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.